Welcome back to Movies Outpost as we go through the newly released Alien Earth. This is set in the year 2120, and if you want to watch the ultimate timeline, stay till the end of the video. Without further ado, make sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy the recap. Alien Earth begins with a narration stating that the race for immortality resulted in the birth of three beings: cyborgs, who are cybernetically enhanced humans; synths, who are artificially intelligent beings; and hybrid synthetic beings downloaded with human consciousness, with the idea that the most successful corporation will rule the world. In the year 2120, the US CSS Maginot, a Weyland-Yutani deep space research vessel, approaches Earth after a mission of 65 years. Later, the crew wakes up from their pods, and one of the crewmates named Schmal explains that 4 major companies are ruling the Earth right now, including Weyland-Yutani, which they work for, and recently a 4th company was added when a kid named Boy Cavalier became a successful trillionaire. Another crew member named Tang tells them that they will reach Earth in 4 months, but the captain informs them that their communications are down, so the cyborg security chief named Morrow says that he will investigate it. The captain adds that they've been using too much fuel, and Schmal suggests that they let out some specimens in the air, but Morrow refuses, saying that the xenomorphs are their primary mission. Schmal tells Morrow that he doesn't understand how many people they lost while capturing the xenomorphs, but Morrow threatens to restrict Schmal to his quarters if he disobeys, feeling the tension rise. Half of the crew returns to the pods, while the scientist Chibouzo lowers a dead rat into a vessel to study the captured xenomorphs. On Earth, at Prodigy's Neverland Research Island, a terminally ill child named Marcy Hermit is taken to an operating room by the scientist Dame Sylvia, who shows her the robotic body in which they plan to transfer Marcy's consciousness. Cavalier enters the room and tells Marcy that she is going to be the first person to undergo a synthetic transformation, and Sylvia asks Marcy to lie down on the table. Marcy asks for her brother, but Sylvia refuses her, saying that what they are doing is a secret, and Marcy will be allowed to see her brother when she wakes up. Marcy is told to sleep next to the robot, and they start the process of transfer, where the robot experiences Marcy's childhood memories, before finally opening her eyes. Upon adjusting to the new body, Marcy renames herself Wendy and goes to see the beauty of Neverland Island. Sylvia calls for her, and she easily jumps from a high mountain before running towards the facility at high speed. They reach a room, and Sylvia asks her what she thinks about her new body, and Wendy expresses discomfort at being in an adult body, but another synth scientist named Kirsch explains that because robots don't grow, they had to put her in a grown body. Sylvia asks Wendy how she has been feeling emotionally, as the scientists have been trying to stimulate hormones that control emotions, so Wendy can grow into her adult body instead of it being a sudden switch. Sylvia suggests increasing the intensity of the hormones, but Kirsch says that Wendy is no longer human, prompting Sylvia to argue that stimulating a human experience is critical. However, Wendy quickly questions what she is, and Kirsch tells her that she can be anything she wants. Sylvia tells her that more children have arrived and asks Wendy to act as a big sister and help them transition to hybrids. She picks 4 of the sick children at once and tells them that they all can grow strong like her, before clarifying that grown-up minds are too stiff for the transition. So currently only children are being transformed into hybrids. However, one of the girls asks when she will be allowed to go home, and Wendy explains that they won't be able to go home ever again. After that, as Cavalier supervises, Wendy watches all of the children transition into hybrids. Later that night, Cavalier reads them the story of Peter Pan through the speakers in their rooms, and Wendy gets a flashback of her good childhood memories, which are followed by images of the hardships of sickness and poisonous animals. Back at the Maginot, Morrow tries to fix the navigation error, but quickly realizes that specimens have broken loose. A crew member named Zaveri begs for Morrow to let her inside the control room, but he welds the edges to ensure his own protection and hums to himself while writing the report of the crew's death. Zaveri is killed by a grown xenomorph, adult stage, which next tries to break into the control room, but Morrow reports that a collision with Earth is unavoidable now. The xenomorph manages to break the door open, so Morrow quickly gets inside a confined panic room before the xenomorph can get to him. In New Siam, a prodigy city, a boy named Joe walks in the city, and Wendy explains that he's her brother who works as a medic, and that she keeps an eye on him through the city cameras. Joe works for Prodigy for healing the soldiers, and he was told that Marcy died. Later, as Joe watches a movie, Wendy smiles at the memory of them watching the same movie together in childhood. The next morning, Joe is on the rooftop with his team when they witness the crash of Maginot in New Siam. And his team lead, named Siberian, quickly informs the authorities about the downed spacecraft, urging them to rush to the affected area. They're given instructions to look for the survivors, evacuate the injured, and secure the site. Joe steps outside the car with his team and is shocked to see so many people suffering before quickly regaining his composure and helping the wounded. Rubble from the building that the Maginot collapsed in keeps falling, resulting in small explosions, and the team heads inside the building to look for survivors. However, they move to the lower floor and find various people dead before finally entering Maginot, where Morrow wakes up, leaves the panic vessel, and heads to the control room, ordering the ship to contact Weyland-Yutani and report that it has been boarded. Because he is unaware of the cargo's condition, he decides to check on the specimen while waiting for reinforcements. At the same time, Wendy undergoes a hearing test that confirms her hearing is far superior to humans, but she notices live footage showing security rescuing the injured and spots Joe among the soldiers. She rushes to Cavalier with Kirsch, where they find Cavalier's advisor, Adam, explaining that they haven't found any ship survivors yet, but have soldiers searching. Kirsch tries to speak to Cavalier, but he dismisses him and is about to leave. However, Wendy insists they continue. Cavalier orders Adam to call in reserves, but Wendy suggests letting the hybrids help, which Cavalier rejects and declares that the Maginot's contents now belong to Prodigy. Adam warns that Weyland-Yutani won't be pleased, but Cavalier doesn't care, so Wendy argues that the hybrids are strong, fast, and unbreakable, so they should rescue people. When Cavalier asks why she's so eager, Kirsch reveals that Joe is inside the tower, and Cavalier is surprised by Wendy's human-like concern, so he agrees to send the hybrids on the mission before telling Adam to monitor their brain activity under stress. Adam objects, saying they're still prototypes, so Cavalier puts Kirsch in charge of them. Wendy quickly rushes to grab her plushie and a sword before heading to the other hybrids, who are discussing their past illnesses. They all agree that being sick was quite hard and wonder if their new bodies could die by exploding or being set on fire, but one of them says that it is better than dying of cancer. Another says that their batteries might die, but Wendy interrupts them to tell them about their spaceship crash rescue mission. Meanwhile, inside Maginot, Morrow tries to make his way to the ship's cargo without being noticed by the soldiers and hides when two soldiers get close to him. The soldiers enter the room where the xenomorphs are confined and see a dead body there, but before they can do anything, a small facehugger quietly latches itself onto one of the soldiers, and they discover that another chestburster is trying to break out of its glass cage, so they quickly get out of the room. However, Morrow holds them at gunpoint. The soldiers quickly explain that they are Prodigy's search and rescue team, but Morrow shoots in the air and asks them to drop their weapons so they comply. Morrow forces them into the lab and cuffs them to a pipe before asking them about Cavalier's location. And when he doesn't find a satisfactory answer, he leaves them trapped inside the lab. On the other hand, the other half of the soldiers find the cryo chambers and realize that the people inside them have been dead for more than a week and find strange holes inside the bodies, suggesting an unknown creature crawled out of one of the chambers. So they start following the trail of blood. The soldiers trapped inside the lab try to free themselves, but a blood-draining alien insect bites one of them, sucking his blood dry before another juvenile blood-draining creature attacks the other one. In an aircraft, Kirsch tells Wendy that humans were full of fear because of their short lifespan, but their brain held immense power, using which they built machines and went to space, so they stopped believing that they were weak. However, in the animal kingdom there is always someone bigger who is always hunting the lower species, as everyone must die. Wendy goes to sit next to Kirsch and whispers that her brother won't die, but Kirsch tells her that it's inevitable as he might die from injury, illness, or even old age. However, Wendy refuses to accept it, saying that she will save him no matter what. At the same time, the building where Joe is shakes, as it can no longer hold its weight because of the crash. Joe ventures deep into the Maginot with his team, and they find another dead body with the same hole in the chest, but Siberian comes across a terrifying dead body. Joe quickly says that these bodies didn't die in a crash, as they have signs of suffocation. So Siberian suggests that perhaps the cabin depressurized, but Joe says that blue lips indicate some kind of toxin. He notices a screen and finds that there were unidentified objects in the dead body's gastrointestinal tract, labeled as 1562, but Siberian tells him to move forward as the forensic team will deal with this. They move to the lower portion of the spacecraft, and Joe tells the soldier named Benjamin that the situation seems to involve xenomorphs, but they continue moving down. On the other hand, Sylvia watches videos of sick children before their transition when Cavalier walks in and says that people believe children have immense potential, but Sylvia disagrees, saying that they can teach children to become their best selves. Cavalier says that AI fears that Prodigy will make better machines, while Prodigy is better because it is working with human potential. However, Sylvia believes that they've ended death, so now they have to work on improving the quality of life. Otherwise, their experiments have no point. Cavalier tells her that he only worked on this to create a person smarter than himself, saying that after granting so many abilities to Wendy and using the best scientists in the world, he finally wants to have an interesting conversation with someone. On the way to the crash spacecraft, one of the hybrids, named Slightly, asks Wendy if there will be dead bodies at the site, but Wendy tells him not to think about such things before telling him that her brother is in the rescue team saving lives. However, she is scared because Joe is immortal. But Kirsch interrupts by telling them to gear up as they are close to the location. Meanwhile, Siberian and Benjamin jump down a floor and Joe is about to jump when he suddenly feels drool drop over him. He quickly points his gun up, But a xenomorph shows up, so Joe jumps down and misses the landing, causing him to fall, but he quickly gets up and runs to an elevator. He sends a request for backup, saying there is a creature after him, but his message doesn't go through. He thinks of how he submitted the forms for his resignation yesterday as he got into a medical school, while Wendy monitors her brother from her room before hacking into the HR robot and rewriting its code to talk to Joe. Cavalier is shocked by Wendy's skill, but the HR gets control and rejects Joe's request to resign. On the other hand, the hybrids reach the accident site, where Wendy hears a loud buzzing and asks Nibs, another hybrid, if she hears the sound. But Nibs is confused. Wendy moves with Kirsch, where a soldier reports that the tower has 80 floors above the ground and 20 below. But their major concern is the gas pipes and fuel, as it can lead to a huge fire. The soldier expresses disappointment that he requested backup 3 hours ago, but they've only sent Kirsch now with 6 more people. However, Kirsch reassures him that they are a special team. Wendy starts checking the cameras for Joe and eventually finds him in the elevator. So she asks about the location and rushes there. Kirsch sends Slightly with Wendy, while he leads the rest of the hybrids, giving them orders to assess the damage, rescue survivors, and send the location of the wounded people. Elsewhere, Cavalier gets a call from Yutani, who tells him that she will reimburse the damage and says that she wants to send a team to take back what's in the vessel. But Cavalier clearly states that any incursion will be treated like a hostile act, refusing any entry into Neverland. He quickly orders that whatever is inside the research vessel must be brought to him. The hybrids enter the vessel and are fascinated to see non-terrestrial species. So Kirsch quickly tells 3 of them to go find something they can capture this creature with. The trio heads inside and finds another blood-sucking alien sucking the blood of the 2 dead soldiers, making them scared. But Curly moves in and reveals that there are more creatures inside the lab. However, before they can do anything, they see an ocellus larva pop out of the eye of a distorted cat. They start screaming when the ocellus approaches them, and it latches itself onto Nibs, trying to stick to her face, but Nibs pushes it away, making Curly trap the creature under the box, while Smee holds it to stop it from moving. Wendy is still searching for her brother and notices his bag on the floor before realizing that there are huge claw marks on the walls, which makes Slightly fear that there might be bears in the building. However, Joe reaches a higher floor and finds another soldier, so they knock on an apartment door, telling people to evacuate. But one apartment is having a party and refuses, saying that if there was a real issue, they would have been informed by Cavalier. Just as they close the door, Joe notices the xenomorph and tells the soldier near him not to move, but the xenomorph's tongue pierces the soldier, making his machine gun go off. The apartment owner opens the door and screams, but the xenomorph heads inside and kills the entire party. Joe picks up the dead soldier's gun and heads inside the apartment, where the xenomorph tries to jump on Joe and barely misses. The alien is about to kill Joe when Morrow shows up and subdues the creature with a special gun. Joe thanks Morrow, but Morrow hits him using the same gun, making him unconscious. He then sprays a large net over the xenomorph and escapes with it. Meanwhile, Smee loudly calls for Kirsch, who heads to the lab and is about to free the creature from the box. But Nibs stops him, telling him that the creature is extremely fast. Kirsch attaches himself to the vessel and realizes that there are different specimens in each cage. Back with Morrow, he is found and cornered by soldiers, who question what is inside his bag. Morrow refuses to answer, and the soldiers are shocked at seeing the bag move, so Morrow tells them to calm down as the xenomorphs can sense fear. However, the xenomorph frees itself and quickly kills all of the soldiers before moving to another batch of soldiers. With Kirsch in the lab, only Toodles monitors the species, and it soon reveals a hand-like object that is about to grab Toodles' face, but he's called by Curly in the lab. Kirsch finds xenomorph ovomorphs, or eggs, and quickly sends Smee there, telling him to link up with Wendy and make sure no one is allowed in or out without Kirsch's permission. On the other side, Joe regains consciousness and finds a signed baseball of Reggie Jackson, which triggers his childhood memories of seeing the match with his dad. Soon, Wendy shows up to ask him who he's talking to and is fascinated to know that he can talk to their dad. However, he tells her that he talks to him in his imagination and hands her the ball before telling her more about their father. He notices that Slightly has blood on his face and tries to look for the cut, but Slightly tells him that they don't bleed anymore, making Joe realize that they are synthetic. Wendy suddenly gets a call from Kirsch, asking her to secure the cargo and telling her to hurry up as the cargo might escape, breed, and cause problems. Wendy quickly asks Joe to follow them to the front section, as there will be a lot of people who need his help, and he agrees. On their way, Slightly tells Joe that they are children who were really sick, so they were transformed into hybrids, and while doing so, he reveals that Wendy's real name was Marcy. Joe says that his sister's name was Marcy as well, so Slightly tells him that Wendy is his sister. Wendy quickly tells Slightly to leave and tries to make Joe believe that she is his sister, but he tells her that he attended the funeral of his sister. Wendy tells him that Cavalier visited them when she was sick and told their father that he could save her life, but in turn her father had to keep this a secret. Slightly reminds them that they need to hurry, and Wendy tells him to believe her as they start moving towards the location of the ovomorphs. Joe asks her questions about their childhood, and when Wendy answers them all correctly, he embraces her. Slightly again asks them to come, and Wendy starts hearing the buzzing sound as she gets near the ovomorphs. Suddenly, the xenomorph shows up and takes Joe down a hole in the wall with itself. so Wendy tells Slightly to guard the ovomorphs while she runs to the other side. In the lab, the rest of the hybrids contain the aliens, and Toodles asked Kirsch about the species, so he reveals that 5 undiscovered species were identified, but the crew lost containment. Nibs looks at the creature that was previously latched onto her hand with fear and asks Curly why they weren't allowed to keep their names after getting converted into hybrids. Curly tells her that it's because they are a secret, but Nibs questions why the hybrids are all named after Peter Pan characters and why Marcy was chosen as Wendy, and Curly explains that it's because Wendy was the first one to be converted. She comforts Nibs by saying that Curly is called Pickles in the books, but Toodles joins them, saying that Curly has some scenes while Toodles always misses everything. Kirsch gets a call from Cavalier, where he orders the xenomorph specimens to be transferred to Neverland Island for experimentation. Despite objections from Kirsch and Sylvia, he asks about Wendy and expresses disappointment at Kirsch letting her out of his sight. Meanwhile, Wendy finds Joe trapped in a parking lot and tries to free him, but he tells her to stay away as the xenomorph will be returning soon. However, the alien hisses at them before getting on top of the container they are in, so Wendy stabs it from above, but the xenomorph's blood is molecular acid, which makes the upper metal of the container melt. The alien shakes the entire container, but Joe grabs a weapon and gets out. However, he is caught by the xenomorph, who is about to pierce its tongue into Joe when Wendy shows up and puts a hook into its inner jaw. She drags him and puts him inside a compartment while Joe closes the door. But Wendy gets dragged in at the last second. Joe struggles to open the door and sees that Wendy has killed the xenomorph, but she falls unconscious as well. Joe, who is equally injured, rushes to her, but he vomits blood and passes out. Slightly, who is still guarding the ovomorphs, hears a noise and quickly takes out his knife, only to realize that it's Smee. They playfully fight each other before Smee updates Slightly about blood-drinking creatures, and Slightly tells him about the xenomorph. They start discussing the ovomorphs, but Morrow shows up and tells them to get away from the ovomorphs. He asks them which city it is and asks him if he's one of the survivors, but Morrow realizes that they are behaving like children, so he questions what they are doing here. The hybrids refuse to answer, saying it's classified information, so Morrow explains that he was the security chief of the research vessel when they discovered these ovomorphs in space. However, they started to hatch, and Morrow says that they've met the xenomorphs, but the hybrids try to leave. However, Morrow stops them. Morrow downloads Maginot's data and asks them if they would harm others just to save themselves, and the hybrids say that they will think of all the factors as they would go out of their way to save their friends and family. Morrow calls them fools for thinking they have parents when they are synthetics, and Smee is about to tell them the reality of hybrids but Slightly stops him. Morrow completes the data transfer, erases the source before planting a device on Slightly. Kirsch shows up and Morrow asks if he's the parent of these synthetics but escapes when Kirsch refuses to answer him. The area is swept clean. Joe and Wendy are taken to Neverland for treatment, and all the xenomorphs and the ovomorphs are transported as well. Kirsch is told that Morrow wasn't found, and Cavalier smiles widely at the sight of the xenomorphs. One of the scientists named Arthur starts fixing Wendy, while Sylvia blames herself for allowing Wendy to go to such a dangerous place, as she is Wendy's guardian. However, Arthur is more frustrated that Cavalier allowed $1 billion prototype to go to an active crash site. Cavalier then shows up, so they quickly change the topic, but Cavalier pushes them to say it to his face. Sylvia calms them down and tells them that Wendy made a brave decision, so Cavalier asks them if they can save her. They tell him that they are working on it, and tell Cavalier that he can't talk to Wendy, as Kirsch suspended her hardware at the site to save her from intense damage. Cavalier goes to the quarantine lab, where all the aliens are, and finds Kirsch there, who questions Cavalier about whether getting some xenomorphs was worth risking his work of 10 years. Cavalier says that he thought Kirsch would be excited to discover new things with these species, but Kirsch notices that a xenomorph ovomorph is about to hatch and quickly pushes Cavalier out. He explains that ovomorphs only open when they sense organic life near them, as the bodies in the cryotube in the research vessel were killed from the inside, meaning the proto-creature develops inside the host body. Cavalier orders him to lock the lab down and make sure only synthetics are allowed inside. Meanwhile, Adam questions Smee and Slightly about their interaction with Morrow and how he escaped. He informs them that they are circulating pictures of Morrow taken from the retinal camera of the hybrids, which makes the hybrids slightly uncomfortable. Smee asks Adam if they're going to find Morrow, as he's worried about their safety, and Adam reassures him, saying that Morrow would be either dead or in custody by the end of the day. On the other hand, Morrow is roaming in the streets of New Siam, where he finds a phone and quickly calls Ms. Yutani. He provides his code word and is shocked to see that the current in charge is the granddaughter of the Yutani he used to know. She asks him about the creatures and he reveals that they were captured, but he has all the data. She tells him to return so they can do a full debrief, but Morrow isn't sure, as these creatures are his life's work, so he says that he will get them back in Neverland. Curly goes to report to Cavalier about their mission, but he refuses to hear it, saying that he sent Wendy on the mission. She challenges Cavalier's favoritism toward Wendy and examines the place where he created their bodies, but isn't bothered by it, as it means she gets to live forever. She tells him that Wendy only thinks about Joe while Curly has ideas on how to make the world better. She reveals that she has learned French and he's impressed by her imagination. So he gives her a few books and recordings, saying that she can discuss these with him once she is finished reading. Elsewhere, Slightly is watching TV when he suddenly hears Morrow's voice inside his head. Morrow asks him about when a machine isn't a machine, and Slightly says that he doesn't want to talk to Morrow. But eventually he manipulates Slightly into becoming his friend. Meanwhile, Wendy wakes up and hears the cracking sound of the ovomorphs, while Curly, Toodles, and Kirsch experiment on the ovomorph. They put a suction tube on top, telling Toodles to vacuum it if it tries to escape. Kirsch starts to cut the ovomorph open and then pushes its layers apart, which makes the facehuggers sound too loud for Wendy. Kirsch cuts the final membrane and the sound gets so intense that Wendy screams in pain, which only gets better when Kirsch electrocutes the facehugger. Kirsch dissects the creature to find the molecular acid blood, and Wendy quickly goes inside the lab. Kirsch takes out the larval facehugger embryo from the ovomorph, and the sound again makes Wendy fall onto her knees, making her unconscious. On the other hand, the doctors perform Joe's surgery, and his damaged lung is removed from the body, which Kirsch places next to the developing xenomorph embryo. After Wendy awakens, she is unable to hear the scientists, and Kirsch tells them that she was able to hear a weird sound as she got closer to the xenomorph. So perhaps it has something to do with the xenomorphs. Cavalier shows up and tells Kirsch to go run some experiments with the aliens, and then also asks Sylvia to submit the field report on the hybrid performance, reminding her that she isn't Wendy's mother. Once she leaves, he tells Arthur to bring back Wendy's hearing so they can figure out if it's a hardware or a software issue. Joe shows up and Wendy tells him that she heard an odd sound in the lab, after which she can't hear anything. And Joe is shocked that they brought the xenomorphs to the island. However, Cavalier tells Arthur to turn on Wendy's hearing, and after figuring out the frequency at which Wendy can listen to the xenomorphs, Arthur tells her that he will figure out the sound so he can turn it off. But both Cavalier and Wendy resist it. Cavalier asks her to reproduce the sound, which confuses Wendy, but he encourages her, and Wendy discovers she can speak the xenomorphs' language at a frequency audible to humans. Joe stops her, telling Cavalier that she needs to rest, but Cavalier insists, saying that she has a battery that can power a city. Joe insists, saying that Wendy is a frightened child, but Wendy tells him that she can speak for herself. However, Arthur also says that Wendy needs rest, so Cavalier eventually agrees and asks everyone except Adam to leave the room. Adam tells him that they need to know why the xenomorph is talking to Wendy, but Cavalier thinks that they might be talking to each other, while Adam believes that they must have heard Wendy speak their language, so they know they can communicate with her. He suggests that Cavalier return the xenomorphs to Yutani, but Cavalier refuses, saying he doesn't want to wake up with a chestburster in his body. On the other hand, Joe looks around Wendy's room and tells her that he's angry at Prodigy for not letting him meet her when she was in the hospital. He explains that he wanted to come to her, but couldn't because he was on the other side of the earth. However, he's here now, and they both watch their favorite movie together. Meanwhile, Slightly is on a walk outside when Morrow talks to him again, telling him to bring him a xenomorph ovomorph, but Slightly refuses to steal. Morrow convinces him by saying that the ovomorph belonged to him and Prodigy stole it, but Slightly still refuses, saying that Prodigy is his home. However, Morrow gains Slightly's trust by telling him his first name and then asking about Slightly's information, including his real name as Arish Singh from India. When Slightly goes back to his room, he finds Kirsch in there, who asks Slightly if he would report Kirsch if he did something wrong, and Slightly says that he will stand for his friends. Later, Kirsch and Toodles experiment with Trypanohincha ocellus, an octopus-like alien that implants itself in a sheep's brain through its eye socket. And notice that the gamma waves have increased, showcasing that the ocellus is highly intelligent. Kirsch notices that it's looking at the people, and Cavalier gains its attention by throwing a ball at the glass wall. Elsewhere, Arthur takes Sylvia outside the lab, to the middle of the jungle, where he believes they aren't being monitored, and tells Sylvia that he doesn't believe this is science anymore, as they are halfway through testing hybrids, but they are shifting their focus to xenomorphs. However, Sylvia tells him that they can do two things at a time, but Arthur insists that Cavalier doesn't respect their work. So Sylvia reminds him that Cavalier is currently one of the most successful people in the world. Arthur still stands firm that this isn't science, so Sylvia tells him that light is both a particle and a wave, suggesting that a thing can be more than just one thing. But Arthur insists that they are playing with the lives of young, sick children here. He tells her that he's sharing this concern as her husband and that they should stick to the protocols and reevaluate the risks. Sylvia comforts him, but suddenly Nibs shows up to tell them that she is pregnant. Arthur tells her that it isn't possible, but Nibs gets offended by it and tells them that she isn't lying. Sylvia takes Nibs to her office, where Nibs reveals that she believes God brings babies to mothers. So Sylvia tries to explain the biological process, but Nibs believes that her baby is special. Sylvia tries to show the diagram of their synthetic bodies, but Nibs harshly refuses to look at it and tells Sylvia that the baby inside her is a girl named Clarissa. Sylvia thinks it might be a trauma response and starts to talk about the xenomorph that attacked Nibs in the tower, but Nibs becomes violent. Sylvia calls for backup to send her back to her room, and Nibs is unknowingly placed under house arrest. Elsewhere, Joe is called by Adam, who tells him that they need to discuss Joe's future with Prodigy. So Joe asks about his unit, but Adam refuses any answer. He asks Joe if he believes the transition was successful, and Joe says that Wendy has the same memories and sense of humor as his sister but refuses to answer any of Adam's questions. Adam tells him that he is required to answer, and Joe decides to quit the job Prodigy is offering. But Adam threatens to send him a large bill for his new lung and forever separate him from Wendy. Joe questions if they really transferred Marcy's consciousness into Wendy and wonders when Wendy can return home, but Adam clarifies that Wendy is property of Prodigy, a prototype of a project that will lead to immortality, so he will never be able to take her home. Joe goes out of the office and is surprised to see Benjamin and Siberian there, so he hugs them. Elsewhere, Wendy goes to meet Sylvia, but finds Cavalier there instead. He asks her if she felt like she was fighting the Indians or the pirates while fighting with xenomorphs, which confuses Wendy. But Cavalier continues, saying that Wendy is following the storyline of Peter Pan. However, Wendy says that she only wanted to protect Joe, and Cavalier is tired of Wendy always putting Joe first. He asks her what she thinks the xenomorphs are saying, and Wendy tells him that she can't understand them but he shouldn't have cut them open. Cavalier says that if he didn't dissect them they would harm him and asks if he should send Joe back, hoping Wendy would give him a solid reason to let Joe stay, but Wendy only repeatedly requests him. Cavalier tries to trigger her by saying that Joe made excuses and didn't visit her when she was sick. When Wendy doesn't give a reaction, Cavalier tells her that if she figures out what the xenomorphs are saying then he will let Joe stay with her. She promises him that Joe won't become a distraction, and Cavalier allows her to leave. Back in the lab, Toodles tells Kirsch that his name isn't the name of a serious person and that he would like to change it to Isaac. Kirsch allows him to rename himself and Isaac goes out to find Slightly standing near the lab door. Isaac tells him that he's working on science and Kirsch really relies on him, so Slightly lies that Arthur needs something from the lab but is unable to answer when Isaac asks him what Arthur needs. Isaac invites him to play games but Slightly panics, saying he'd rather walk to clear his head, and leaves. Slightly goes out and contacts Morrow to tell him that he won't steal the ovomorphs from his friends, but Morrow tells him that he's with his mother and starts using threats against his family as leverage. Morrow tells him to sneak a human host into the lab, which will make the ovomorph hatch, and a facehugger will attach itself to the human. He tells Slightly to hide the person for 2 days, after which the facehugger will fall off and the person will wake up. He tells him that he will be close when Slightly calls and he can bring the person to Morrow, but they both are unaware that Kirsch has been monitoring their conversations. When Slightly fears that he won't be able to do it, Morrow lets Slightly's mother talk to him and tells him to do what he says if he wants to protect his family. On the other hand, the hybrids sit with Joe playing games until Curly asks him what the 5 is. So Joe explains that the old world had governments and democracy, but the system failed, making 5 corporations rise to fix the problems. They now work together to run the world, but because Prodigy took Yutani's crashed ship's cargo, Yutani is angry and has asked the 5 to step in to get their cargo. Slightly comes there and says that they all have brothers and family, so it's unfair that only Wendy gets to be with her brother. He tells Wendy that she isn't the boss and she isn't even the oldest, as both Curly and Isaac are 12 like her. Joe steps in, saying that all of the hybrids deserve to be with their families and they should celebrate their transitions. Smee says they should ask for their families and Slightly says they should demand it, but Curly refuses, fearing that they might send them away. Isaac agrees, saying they are respected here, which shuts their rebellion down. Wendy tells them that she is going to the lab, and there she observes the larval xenomorph embryo inside the lung, while Slightly decides to lure Joe into the lab. Wendy is humming to herself when the embryo pierces the lung, causing blood to fill the case. It next breaks the glass and starts searching for some human host while screeching, but Wendy manages to soothe the creature through communication and even pets it. We go back 17 days before the ship crashed to Earth. Clem wakes up Morrow, telling him about the fire in the ship's containment zone, which led to the escape of 2 facehuggers. Morrow learns that a facehugger got attached to Captain Dinsdale, and in their attempt to remove it, its molecular acid blood killed the captain, while the other facehugger is still attached to Bronsky. Morrow asks what caused the fire and why the ovomorph crates were opened, but Zaveri tells him they have more important matters to deal with. Chibuzo reminds them of the protocol that they should put Bronsky under cryosleep for the rest of the journey. Morrow tells Clem and Chibuzo to check if the rest of the ovomorphs are secured. Zaveri agrees, telling Rahim and Tang to put Bronsky into his tube and prepare the captain's body for burning in space. Morrow learns that the fire destroyed the ship's navigation system and the engine relay, so he tells Zaveri it might be incompetence or sabotage. He tells her to call a shipwide emergency, so he can start an official inquiry, but she protests that it will lead to panic. He confronts her about her romantic involvement with Bronsky, which is against company policy. She tries to explain that humans can get lonely, but he believes she is no longer fit to lead them because her judgment is compromised, so being the security officer he has the right to take control. She notes it would be mutiny, but he tells her he has direct orders from Ms. Yutani to ensure the cargo safely reaches Earth, whether the crew survives or not. Rahim and Tang place Bronsky in his pod, and Rahim notes how humans are smart enough to achieve magnificent scientific discoveries, but too stupid to realize they shouldn't bring these xenomorphs back home. Clem doesn't understand why they need these creatures, so Rahim explains that the Weyland-Yutani Corporation wishes to use them to establish their superiority over the other companies. On the other side, Morrow inspects the storage chambers, and fortunately everything is sealed except for a giant hole in the ship's surface. He checks the footage of the fire incident and how the facehuggers attacked the crew, but as he rewinds the video, he finds an unknown man sabotaging the ship, which led to the fire. Zaveri goes to Bronsky's pod and gets emotional as she places some sand on it for good luck, while Morrow watches their old recording of getting intimate. Morrow tells Schmoll and Malachite how the saboteur is moving without going through the hallway, so he needs to see the ship's blueprints, which surprises them. He warns that if they tell anyone else, they won't get any of the promised shares in the company. After that, Morrow gets armed as they might come face to face with the saboteur, but Clem thinks anyone can be the culprit. After making sure Clem is innocent, he gives him a gun and asks about the communication logs, so Clem mentions someone has already deleted everything, but he's trying to recover it. In the meantime, Zaveri uses the ship's computer named Mother, and she informs the system about the recent incident. She takes over as acting captain, and asks if she can destroy the cargo if the crew's lives are at risk, but the system firmly rejects it because the cargo is the priority. At night, Morrow reads his daughter's letters he received over the years but gets emotional reading the letter where he was informed of her death because of a fire incident at her house. He wakes up to a loud explosion, and as he reaches the control room he learns that someone has blown a hole in the ship after setting fire to the engine controls, so their fuel reserves are down to only 8%. Zaveri thinks they must wake up the rest of the crew, but they suddenly hear the alert for cryopod quarantine breach. They find Bronsky's pod compromised, so Rahim thinks perhaps the creature can't be frozen, but Morrow notes that it doesn't matter how it happened because the fact remains the same. The chestburster embryo has hatched and now it's loose on the ship. Rahim wonders how they should capture it, and Zaveri notes they can't use bullets as their blood is acidic, so Morrow gives them electric guns to knock down and capture the creature. Back in the lab, Chibouzo continues her research on the creatures, discovering that although the alien ocellus doesn't feed on dead animals, if it gets oxygen from blood after 2 weeks it will consume the dead animal. As she records her findings, one of the insects escapes from the pod. The ocellus tries to warn her, but she grabs his pod and places it on the shelf. The insect lays eggs into her water bottle and tries to hide in her sandwich, but luckily Rahim spots it. They place it back in its pod and he tells her about Bronsky's death, so she grabs her water bottle and leaves with him. However, she hasn't properly locked the octopus's pod, so it manages to break free. The group meets, but they are too relaxed, so Zaveri tells them about the seriousness of the issue. Bronsky is dead and they have a xenomorph on the loose. Although it's in an early stage, it's growing fast. Their plan is to sweep the ship and capture it. But Teng tells the rest of the crew that they're out of fuel. Zaveri tells them about the saboteur and declares an emergency, suspending all non-essential movement, but Malachite doesn't take her seriously. He argues with her, but he suddenly starts choking on the food he was eating. So he grabs Chibouzo's bottle and drinks the infected water. Morrow calls everyone for questioning, mentioning that only he, Clem, and Zaveri are allowed to carry guns, and anyone who helps find the saboteur will get an extra share. He starts the questioning with Rahim, who says he was in the medbay the whole morning when the fire broke out, but Morrow notices he's sweating. Rahim mentions that unlike Morrow, humans sweat when stuck in a ship for 65 years. He remains firm about his innocence, saying he only wishes to return home, and he's tired of the nonsense he has to put up with. Meanwhile, Schmoll and Malachite continue working on the navigation repairs, and Malachite jokes about whether Schmoll will buy his wife an expensive gift with the shares. Schmoll answers that his wife will be old by the time he returns, and they don't get shares for the work but for sacrificing 65 years of their life. Malachite suddenly feels sick and vomits blood before passing out, which worries Schmoll. Zaveri accompanies Chibouzo to the lab, but she sees the broken pod and realizes the ocellus has escaped. They suddenly hear the alarm as Schmoll calls them to the medbay, so they seal the door, deciding to deal with the escaped creature later. Elsewhere in the ship, Teng tells Morrow he was at the bridge when the fuel pods blew and he can check the logs, but Morrow thinks logs can be forged. He brings up Teng harassing one of the girls in the cryopods and asks how he moves around without appearing in the cameras. Teng tells him that he's missing the big point. Just because the system says a cryopod is full, it doesn't mean it's always occupied. So Morrow realizes someone else is awake. Morrow finally recovers the communication log and checks everyone's messages, which reveal that a man named Petrovich made a deal with Cavalier to land the ship in his territory, in exchange for shares in his company and a new body. Morrow goes to check the pods and finds Petrovich missing, which confirms his suspicion. But he suddenly hears the alarm and returns to the medbay. Malachite continues to lose blood, so Rahim suggests performing surgery to stop the bleeding, which Zaveri allows despite Morrow's rejection. They shockingly find 6 xenomorph embryos lining his esophagus, but when Rahim tries to remove them, they release a deadly gas and the team starts choking. Morrow tells Zaveri to seal the room, and within seconds both Rahim and Chibouzo die along with Malachite. Clem rushes to them and informs them that the creature has killed Teng, so Morrow tells them to get to the bridge so they can seal themselves in, because they have enough fuel to get them into geosynchronous orbit of Earth, where they can wait for the cleanup team to arrive. But all they need to do is figure out their trajectory. He tells Schmal and Zaveri to go to the engine room and transfer all the functions to the bridge, while he and Clem will wake up the rest of the crew, but Zaveri is still in shock, so he realizes she isn't fit to lead and takes the ship's command from her. On their way, Clem and Morrow get in a shootout with Petrovich, and Clem gets injured, so Morrow tries to cover him. But Petrovich shoots Clem in the head. Morrow circles around and stabs the man from behind, but Petrovich notes that it doesn't matter. They can't stop the monsters. Zaveri drops all the remaining sand on her hand for good luck, but she suddenly senses someone behind her, and as she turns, she finds the giant xenomorph. But before she can take out her gun, it makes her fall, so she quickly gets up and starts running. She manages to reach the engine room and asks Schmal to help her seal the door, but he doesn't move, so she notices he has gotten infected by the creatures. He rushes at her, and strangely, the xenomorph also leaves, while Morrow comes out and enters the engine room, but he finds Zaveri unconscious. He sees Schmal and asks Zaveri to get up, but suddenly the xenomorph also returns and Schmal starts attacking it. The xenomorph stabs Schmal multiple times with its tail, and Zaveri uses this opportunity to escape, but as she tries to enter the control room, Morrow seals the door, so the xenomorph finishes her. Morrow hides in the panic room as the ship crashes to Earth. In the present, Morrow meets Ms. Yutani and convinces her that he will bring the specimen at all costs, and he will also kill Cavalier. She thinks perhaps they can make a deal with Cavalier, but he doesn't think it's possible. So she gives him full support for his mission. At Neverland's Research Island, Wendy meets a xenomorph, and she tries to communicate with it, but Joe worries for her, so Kirsch assures him that it's completely safe, and besides, she killed an adult xenomorph with her bare hands. Joe tries to get more information on hybrids, but Kirsch realizes he plans to take Wendy with him, so he bluntly tells him that Cavalier would never allow that because she is their prize specimen. Back in the lab, they perform a scan of Nibs and they realize there is no physical issue, and it's all psychological. So Sylvia reminds Adam that they knew about Nibs' traumas before they chose her. Adam tells her to reset her to before the tower and slow down her processing speed, but Arthur protests that it's against the rules. Sylvia agrees to do it. So Adam fires Arthur for denying a direct order and tells Sylvia to proceed. He tells Arthur to leave the island by the end of the day, or else it will be considered trespassing and he will be shot. After that, Joe discusses the xenomorphs with Wendy, and he thinks it was a mistake to bring them there, but she mentions they didn't ask for it. He assures her that he will find a way to get her out of there, but she surprises him, saying she might not want to leave that place. After that, Ms. Yutani and Cavalier have a meeting to discuss their dispute, with a mediator trying to help them reach a peaceful settlement. Ms. Yutani tells him that the ship belongs to her, but Cavalier argues that her ship destroyed a large part of his city and killed thousands, so it might be criminal negligence or an act of hostility. She tries to assure him that they are already investigating it, but he doesn't trust her and tells her it's his job to investigate the crash. He thinks she wants to hide the cargo she was smuggling because it violates intercorporate laws. She lies that those creatures were to be taken to an off-planet research facility, but for his pain and suffering she offers $10 billion, which he doesn't like. So they finalize the deal at $20 billion. However, Cavalier notes that he will return them after the quarantine period of 6 weeks, which makes her impatient, and she offers him $50 billion for immediate custody. He rejects her offer, so after they leave she asks Morrow about his progress, and he offers to bring one of the xenomorphs by the end of the day. Sylvia successfully resets Nibs, and when she wakes up, Wendy comes to see her and asks about her earlier statement of having a baby, but Nibs doesn't remember it. Wendy asks her about other things, but Nibs thinks she is joking because she can't remember any of that, so they both get worried and Wendy tries to comfort her. She wonders if Nibs remembers going with Arthur and Sylvia, but when she says no, she realizes they did something to her. Outside the facility, Slightly talks to Morrow, and he tries to convince him that he will follow his instructions, but he gets interrupted by Smee, who wishes to play with him. Slightly tells him that he's busy as they are adults now. But Smee finds adulthood hard and Slightly agrees. Smee tries to leave, but Slightly stops him, saying they will play video games once he's done with his work, so Smee hugs him. After that, Slightly goes to see Joe, and he thinks it's unfair that Wendy can meet her family, but he isn't allowed. So Joe notes that he will talk to them about it. Morrow tells Slightly to hurry up and take Joe to the lab. Slightly lies that he needs to show him something that is connected to Wendy, and although Joe gets ready to leave with him, he gets interrupted as Benjamin calls him for duty, so he has to leave. On the patrol, Joe tries to get information about how he can escape from there, but Siberian understands his intentions and warns him against any misadventure. Wendy once again tries to communicate with the xenomorph, which is growing at a rapid rate, and this time she is more successful. On their way back from the meeting, Kirsch tells Isaac to feed the creatures and perform the experiments in their correct order. Isaac tries to follow the orders, but as he feeds the creatures he accidentally breaks one window, so he opens the door to place the food tray. The Ocellus scares him and he gets trapped inside. So the giant wasp-like alien comes out of its resting place and shoots a deadly chemical on his face, which quickly results in his death, and they start feeding on his dead body. Wendy goes to see Sylvia, and she asks why Nibs can no longer remember most of the things they did the past week. So Sylvia tells her that they had to remove the corrupt data, which enrages Wendy. As Nibs wasn't given a choice, Sylvia notes that she has been going to the secure lab a lot. So Wendy replies that those creatures didn't ask to come there. Wendy mentions that Kirsch told her how they aren't like the rest of humanity, and she thinks he was right, because unlike people who get romantic, they can get rid of all the sadness and all the madness, allowing them to see the world for what it is. Sylvia tries to assure her that her job is to make sure nothing gets lost, and although there will be problems in the journey, she will help them. She asked Wendy to tell her what's wrong so she can fix it, but Wendy instead asked what if she is the one who's wrong. After that, as Arthur is packing his things, Joe comes to see him, so Arthur tells him he's leaving because he got fired. Joe thanks him for taking care of Wendy and asks if she is safe. So Arthur lies since they are being recorded. He offers to show the hybrid's vitals, but he types on the computer that he should take Wendy out of there, and he even shares the boat's code. He also turns off the hybrid's trackers, so Joe leaves after thanking him. But the computer suddenly alerts Arthur that Isaac's tracker isn't connected, and his last location was the secure lab. Kirsch sees through the camera as Slightly tries to enter the lab, but he gets scared, so Morrow threatens him with his mother's life. He asks for one more chance, and just then Arthur arrives, so Slightly lies that Kirsch sent him to watch his stuff, and they both enter the lab. Upon seeing Isaac's body, Arthur rushes to drag him out, but Slightly frees all the creatures and locks the lab. Arthur asks him to open the door from the outside, but he turns his back as the facehugger attacks Arthur. Kirsch sees the whole scene, but when Cavalier asks if everything is alright, he replies in the affirmative. Slightly enters the lab and he manages to take Isaac's body to his room. But he feels guilty and tries to feed him some juice, but the facehugger grabs Arthur's neck even more tightly. Smee arrives and Slightly tries to send him away, but he knows something is wrong and refuses to leave, so Slightly allows him in. He sees an arm underneath the bed, so he moves it and gets shocked to see Arthur like that. Slightly tells him that he had no other choice because Morrow threatened him with his family and he must take this body to the beach. He wonders if Smee will help him, who feels reluctant at first but decides to help his friend. Meanwhile, Kirsch and Cavalier go to the lab, where the guards subdue the creatures and place them back in their cages. Cavalier wonders how this happened, so Kirsch tells him Isaac wasn't careful, and now he's dead. Cavalier asks about the status of reboot and restore, so Kirsch tells him that although it's possible, they haven't been able to do that. He tells Kirsch not to allow the other kids in the lab except Wendy, but they must watch her as they can't allow any more accidents. Kirsch tells him that it wasn't an accident, and he shows him the video of how the parasitized sheep tricked Isaac, so the giant wasp-like alien could feed on him. Wendy arrives and she freaks out seeing Isaac dead, so they tell her it was an accident. She is unable to believe how this could happen, and she believes they aren't as safe as they thought they were. She wishes to warn others, but they try to stop her, so she makes the xenomorph hit its head against the glass wall, which forces the guards to step aside. Wendy tells Joe about Isaac's death and how they aren't safe, so he suggests they should leave, but she reminds him that they can track all hybrids. He tells her that Arthur has disabled the tracking devices, so she goes to get the others since she considers them family. Wendy goes to Nibs's room, where Curly blames her for messing with Nibs's brain, but Wendy tells her that they removed her memories. Curly refuses to hear anything against Cavalier as she thinks they wish to help more people like them, but Nibs thinks she isn't safe there and gets ready to leave. Wendy uses her powers to connect to the secure lab cameras, and she somehow manages to free the xenomorph to create a distraction for their escape. Meanwhile, Slightly and Smee run into Kirsch, who instead of stopping them guides them on the quickest way to reach the beach. After escaping, Wendy and the others see the graves with their real names written on them, so they realize their old bodies are buried there. Slightly and Smee get scared of the patrol guards, so they hide in the bushes, but when they come out they can't find Arthur. They suddenly notice the facehugger and Slightly freaks out, so he crushes it under his shoe. Arthur hears the noise and comes out of the bushes asking questions, but they lie to him that there was a gas leak at the facility, so everyone is going to the beach. They say they were carrying him there since he went unconscious, so he thanks them for saving his life and they all start walking towards the beach, but on the way he regains some of his memories and realizes they are lying. He tells them that they don't need to be scared and they should all return to the facility, but as they turn around he suddenly vomits blood and the chestburster comes out of his body before it escapes from their sight. Smee gets upset because he only helped Slightly since he lied that Arthur would be fine. Slightly forces Smee to help him carry the body to the meeting point, but Morrow is disappointed seeing that they failed to bring the creature. Slightly notes that he wasn't aware there would be another monster, and he thought he had more time. He asks about his mother, but Morrow doesn't answer and takes them with him. On the other hand, Cavalier meets the Ocellus, and he thinks it has great intelligence, so he wishes to talk to it. He asks it a mathematical question, and the Ocellus sheep stomps its foot to share the answer. He gets very impressed and he wishes there was a way they could have a real conversation. So he gets the idea of allowing it to take control of a human, and he thinks he knows just the right person for that. As Wendy and the others are walking to the dock, they get surrounded by the guards, so she warns them to leave, but they don't listen, so she calls the xenomorph, which quickly kills them all. After that, she orders it to stay low and follow them as they continue moving. Meanwhile, Morrow and his men enter the facility in search of the xenomorph, but Kirsch and the guards are already waiting for them. He forces the Yutani soldiers to lower their guns and shows them the young xenomorph they were looking for. Kirsch tells Slightly and Smee to get behind him while Morrow and his men are arrested. As Wendy and the others reach the ship, they encounter Joe's associates, who tell them to lower their weapons and return to the facility. But Nibs notes that she won't return, making a soldier throw her stuffed toy into the water, which enrages her. So she rips off his jaw. Wendy tries to call the xenomorph, but Joe covers her mouth to stop her. A fight ensues where Siberian shoots at Nibs to save her men, but it has no effect on her, so Nibs grabs her, and just as she is about to kill her, Joe knocks her out with a strong electric shock, which angers Wendy. And she questions why he did that. Sylvia goes to the cemetery and places flowers over the graves, but the xenomorph suddenly arrives there and is about to kill her, but luckily Benjamin and the others save her. They take her back to the facility, while the xenomorph goes to other parts of the island where it kills several guards. Adam reports to Cavalier that Morrow has severed the underwater trunk line while Ms. Yutani jams their satellites, cutting off all communication with the outside world. He notes that the hybrids are being held in the holding cell, but it wasn't built for hybrids, so he isn't sure how long it can hold them. Also, the soldiers are patrolling the island, but their numbers are shrinking because of the xenomorph, so he suggests they should evacuate. Cavalier ignores his suggestion, and he wishes he could talk to the Ocellus sheep. Meanwhile, the hybrids wonder if Curly snitched on them, but she denies it, saying if that were the case she wouldn't be there with them. Wendy tells them that she saw their graves, but Curly notes that she isn't dead. However, Smee reminds her that Isaac died. Curly notes that she is Cavalier's favorite, so she shouldn't be there, but Wendy tells her that in Peter Pan Wendy was his favorite, but she grew up, so he punished her. She notes that they aren't kids, but Cavalier won't allow them to be adults, so Nibs thinks they are ghosts, which gives Wendy an idea. And she decides to haunt others instead of being scared. She calls the xenomorph and also disables the cameras. So Cavalier calls Kirsch, who informs him that everything is normal at the secure lab, but he suggests he should return the creatures to Yutani, since they will be arriving there any moment. Cavalier disagrees, so Kirsch tells him that he needs to think rationally. But his voice starts breaking. Cavalier tells the guard to find Adam and tell him to reboot the systems, while he thinks he will feed a weak target to the Ocellus sheep. Meanwhile, Benjamin and the others escort Sylvia back to her room. But after they leave, Wendy makes Sylvia see their old videos, which leave her disturbed. As Morrow wakes up, he finds Joe in the same cage as him. Joe reminds him of when he shot him, but Morrow thinks he saved Joe's life earlier, and he asks about his new lung. He thinks Joe must like being more than an ordinary human, but there is a price when the corporation gives them anything, and Joe notes it's everything. Benjamin and the others continue their patrol, but they notice the comms are down, so they follow the protocol and try to reach the armory, so they can get bigger weapons. However, they get stuck in the elevator as Wendy scares them with a self-destruct warning. But she decides to spare them and looks at her brother, who is stuck in the same cell as Morrow. Smee wonders if she is angry with him, so she tells him that he shot Nibs. However, Smee still thinks he is one of them, and Wendy remembers their past, so she forgives him. She unlocks the door, allowing Morrow to take out the guard. But as he is about to kill him, Joe stops him. Morrow goes to the lab where he sneaks up on Kirsch, and they get in a fight, where Morrow gets the upper hand, slamming him on the table. But when he gets distracted by the creatures, Kirsch uses this opportunity to take him out. As Wendy hears Cavalier approaching them, she calls the xenomorph, and it enters the facility through the sewage pipe. Cavalier notes that he wants to play, but unfortunately they are locked, so he will instead tell them a story. Wendy shocks him by unlocking the door, and he tells them that when he was little his father was a drunk, so he built his first synth at the age of 6. It killed his father, and he made it pretend to be his father because no one would allow a little boy to build an empire. Nibs tells him that they don't belong to him, but he disagrees, saying they are his floor models. They get near him, so his bodyguard tries to stop them, but Nibs quickly kills him, which scares Cavalier. Wendy tells him to run as she would like to play hide and seek. The hybrids try to chase him, but she says he's her target, and she gives them their own targets to go after. As Joe returns to his room, he finds Adam there, who notes that Cavalier has an offer for him in exchange for his sister. Elsewhere, Smee wonders if what they did was right, and Slightly tells him that it isn't their fault because they were forced to do it. As Sylvia looks out through the window, Nibs suddenly comes from behind her with an evil smirk. Meanwhile, Slightly and Smee find Kirsch, so they tie him up, and Morrow tells Slightly that his mother is safe, but Slightly knocks him out by hitting him with the metal container. Adam takes Joe to the room where the Ocellus is out of its container. But as it jumps to attach to him, Joe stops it with his hand. Wendy also arrives there to save her brother, but Adam intervenes to stop her. He overpowers her at first, but she realizes he's also connected to the network, so she orders him to stop, which freezes him while the creature escapes from there. Wendy gets into an argument with Joe because she believes the monsters are better than humans since they are honest about what they want. Cavalier calls his soldiers and promises $1 million to the first person who finds him. He runs into the xenomorph, but the guards also reach there. So Wendy orders the xenomorph to take them out. Cavalier feels relieved, but Joe knocks him out with a strong kick to his face. Meanwhile, Benjamin and the others reach the lab where Siberian gets consumed by a creature. While the Ocellus enters Arthur's corpse, the Yutani jets reach the island as they plan to take their specimen, while Cavalier and others are locked by the hybrids. Wendy tells Cavalier that she has understood his game, that he isn't Peter Pan since he's a mean, angry little man who hates everyone, just like his father. It upsets him, and he wonders if his employees won't stop her, but they are in no position to defend him. Slightly reports to Wendy that the plant creature and the Ocellus got away, but they don't have to worry about it since they are hybrids. Curly asks what they should do next, and Wendy tells her it's their turn to rule now, which amuses Cavalier. That's the first season of Alien Earth completely recapped. If you'd like to see more videos related to this, check out my complete Aliens timeline recap, and as always, stay awesome and take care.